you might better do it. Oh yeah, try it again.
Let's try again. Dum, dum, dum. That one.
Perfect.
Yes, great. You wouldn't think that I'd spent 18 months on Zoom and I'm still learning how to use it. Hey, we all got stuff to learn. So as you heard, I'm Director for Gender Justice. And it's great to be with you this evening to talk about gender-based violence and what we can all do in response to that. But before I start, it's just to let you be aware of the National Domestic Violence Helpline number, which is 0808 2000 247. It's always useful to have that number handy in case it's needed to pass on to anybody. And it's quite easy to remember. It's 08, you repeat it, 08. It was formed in the year 2000 and it's open 24 hours, 7 days a week. 0808 2000 247. It's a good way of remembering it. So what is gender-based violence? What we're talking about here? Well, the United Nations describes it as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual or mental harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion and arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private. So it covers a whole range of things, you know, physical, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse is in there. It's all about coercive and controlling behaviour, of limiting somebody's freedom. Now, the astute of you will notice that it says women and not men in there. Now, we know that gender-based violence also covers men and trans and LGBTQIQ+. We will look at that later, but the levels, the vast majority of gender-based violence is male violence against women. In the UK, I'll explain when we get to the stats, but the vast majority is male violence against women. So we have to face that reality and deal with that reality, although obviously all violence is in between partners in relationships is wrong. So at the heart of gender-based violence is the abuse of power. It's about power differences and misusing and abusing that power to gain power and control over another person. And it's a desire to control. So it's an incredibly selfish, self-centered thing. It's basically saying, I'm in the center and I will use whatever tactic is within my power to keep you under my control. And you're there to serve my needs. That is what it's about, is your needs don't count. I'm at the center, you serve my needs, and I will do whatever is in my power to make sure that your focus and your attention and your energy is all on me. And obviously that's the opposite of the love and freedom that Christ brings us. And, you know, Jesus died to give us a choice of that. Do we choose Christ or not? And that is the thing, is that violence and abuse is a choice. And that's sometimes hard because we have lots of myths around abuse. So it's because he was angry, or he lost his job, or, you know, he was drunk. But actually, a lot of men get angry. A lot of men get drunk. A lot of men lose their jobs, but they don't go and abuse a woman or violate a woman. It is a choice. You know, we can often say that, you know, a man who chooses to abuse or gets drunk in a pub doesn't choose to abuse the 6'4" rugby bloke, does he? He chooses to leave the pub, walk home, come in, find his partner and abuse his partner. There's a lot of choices going along that. And if you know that that's the case, that alcohol does that, then actually stop drinking. You know, we need to be aware of some of the myths and of abuse and dispel those myths. And the issue with this gender-based violence is completely and utterly preventable, and it is solvable. In essence, those that are perpetrating the violence need to stop. It's as simple as that. And yet it isn't as simple as that, because of our concepts of what is acceptable or in relationships, or what we think is acceptable in relationships, or what we don't call out as abuse. So I want you to think of 3 women in your life. You know, it could be your mum, your daughter, your sister, your aunt. I also want you to think about the number of women in your church. So have a think about your church, how many women are in your church, and then divide it by 3. Just keep that number in your head. Because the reality is that 1 in 3 women globally will suffer violence and abuse at the hands of a partner or former partner. Physical and sexual violence is a health problem. It's a public health problem. So if you think of those 3 women that you know and love, or you think about 1/3 of women in your church, how many women could be experiencing or have experienced gender-based violence? And what are we doing as a church to respond to that and provide help, support, referrals to professional services that are available? So that's the global number, is 1 in 3, which is linked to the Mothers Union campaign, no more 1 in 3, because we want to stop it. We want to see this ended. And it starts early. So the 16 to 24 age group is at high risk of abuse by a partner or a former partner. And that relates to the UK as well. And it's looking at, if you think back to power, it's who has the power in those relationships and how they're using that power. And as you can see there, most violence against women is perpetrated by a current or former husbands. And one of the most dangerous times is when a woman decides to leave their violent partner or abusive partner. In the UK, that's the time where they're most at risk of death. So when we come to, that quite well-known phrase of why doesn't she just leave, which is 5 words, and we've minimized it and excused the abuse there. Why doesn't she just leave? Just and she. Actually, why doesn't he stop would be the phrase. But actually, there's lots of barriers and boundaries to a woman leaving an abusive relationship. And I'm sure Becca might talk about that later, but we need to be careful because of the numbers of violence that happens at that point. And also, we're still in essence going through COVID-19, and in the initial lockdown, domestic abuse increased exponentially around the world. It massively shot up. Statistics in South Africa and New Zealand, all of them shot up, and it increased in the UK too. So much so that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says there was a horrifying global surge in domestic abuse. And in the first 3 weeks in the UK, female domestic homicides tripled in the first 3 weeks. So that's losing your life. On an average, 1 woman every 3 days is killed in the UK due to domestic abuse. So women are literally losing their lives every week due to domestic abuse, something that's wholly and utterly preventable. And then when we look at the intersectionalities, it's called, or multiple vulnerabilities, women with disabilities are at an increased risk. They're 2 times more likely to experience violence, and then 10 times more likely to experience sexual violence. So increasing vulnerabilities. And again, if we look at Black and ethnic minority women, they will have an increased level of experience, more likely to experience violence and abuse. It is in our churches too. So in Australia, research released this year in April, the National Anglican Family Violence Research Report said that the prevalence of intimate partner violence amongst Anglicans was the same or higher than in the wider Australian community. And then it went on to say that actually the prevalence of intimate partner violence amongst church attending Anglicans was the same or higher than among other Anglicans. So basically what they're saying is if you're a church going Anglican, you have a greater prevalence or likelihood of experience intimate partner violence than in the general society. That is a horrifying thought. That if you go to church, you're more likely, you have the same or higher to actually experience intimate partner violence. And then there is the restored research, which I'm sure Becca will mention, which was done a few years ago now with the University of Coventry and Leicester across Cumbria, and found that 42.2% experienced at least one abusive act in their current or previous relationship. And actually 1 in 4 were experiencing in their current relationship. And I think horrifying for us was that 6 women who were currently in relationships where they feared for their lives. So this is churchgoers across Cumbria, and that was all denominations that were covered. This was the results from a few years ago. So what that says is actually domestic abuse is in our churches too, gender-based violence is in our churches too, and what are we doing about it, and what are we saying? Pumzile Nguka, the former executive director of UN Women, said that all countries worry me because of the universality of violence against women, and the fact that 75% of violence against women is domestic violence is the issue, and that the home is the unsafest place for a woman to be. Now, in the UK, we often, sort of clearly that's on the timer, we often think that actually home is the safe place, and you know, probably you as well as myself has learned that actually stranger danger, be careful where you walk at night. Well, that sort of cuts across this, and yes, we do have to be careful because of the violence, but actually the place where most violence happens is behind closed doors, is in the home. And the cost of this globally is $1.5 trillion. And that was before the pandemic. So each of us, and it's the same in the UK, Professor Sylvia Walby, I think estimated it was £59 billion a year it's cost in the UK on dealing with domestic abuse. So we're all paying for it through our taxes. So what is the Anglican Communion doing? Well, who are we first? For those of you that don't know, well, we're a global family of churches in 165 countries and 42 member churches or provinces, as they're called. And we have 85 million members. And the average Anglican is a 30+ woman in Africa. So that is the stereotype of an Anglican is a 30+ woman in Africa. So we have a good target group of who we are dealing with here. The Anglican Communion has a structure and have passed resolutions, the Anglican Consultative Council resolutions, which is the governing body of the Anglican Communion Office, which encourage churches around the world to implement these resolutions. And there are several resolutions relating to gender justice and gender-based violence. 15.7, 16.2.3, they won't mean much to you here, but what they are useful for is understanding the structure and then saying to, say, the Church of England or our own churches, how are we implementing these resolutions? Because this is what's been agreed globally, that the Anglican Communion globally has agreed on what we think. So how are we implementing these resolutions and what are we doing about it? So why that is important, as I said, is understanding the structure and how it operates, how the structure makes decisions, how those decisions can be implemented and monitored, and to lobby your own diocese or church to implement those decisions. So you can, we can show this afterwards, but yeah, those are the resolutions that you can look up. And how that leads as an example here is, I wanted to share you an example of advocacy and how advocacy makes a difference. So in 2011, the primates, the bishops or archbishops' letters in Ireland actually made a letter stating their concern about gender-based violence. This was then picked up by the Anglican Consultative Council meeting, which happens once every 3 years, and they passed a resolution on gender-based violence. In 2013, the UN Commission on the Status of Women focused on violence against women, and I went as the Church of England representative to represent faith in that context and shared that they've passed these resolutions on gender-based violence. We then brought that back to the General Synod of the Church of England and got a motion passed unanimously on 2014 about gender-based violence and how each diocese should be working to end gender-based violence and utilise resources. So that's an example of how we can get it down to our own local level when using advocacy and starting to make a difference. So when we're looking at advocacy, and this is just one way you can get involved in ending gender-based violence, is know what's been agreed internationally in the UN and regionally, knowing your own country's law. So now we've got the domestic abuse law in the UK. Know what your provinces agreed, know what the Church of England's agreed, and ask for it to be implemented, and ask our churches what they are doing. And as Ursula mentioned at the start, part of what I produced at the beginning was this resource on domestic abuse and COVID-19. And it basically says, what the Bible says about abuse, what it is, the global stats and facts, the impact of COVID-19, and how we as churches can respond. Recognise, respond, refer, record. That's free. It's downloadable on the Anglican Communion website. I'll share the link in the chat so that you can go download it and have a resource that is available, and you can pass it on to your own church, share it around your churches, and think about how you can respond. But it comes to now is like, as a Mothers Union, and this was, I joined a march at the other Mothers Union a few years ago, and this is them outside number 10 handing in a petition. Some of you might have joined in that march. Is, what are you seeing in your area? And this is for you to think about, is what are you seeing in your area or church, and how can you respond? And, could we ask our vicars or our bishops to implement the resolutions on gender-based violence, download the pack and sign up to International Anglican Women's Network? But also, this is Mothers Union. Join in with the Mothers Union No More 1 in 3 campaign, make a difference, sign up to be a Mothers Union member. The more people that are here together working against this, the better, because everyone can make a difference where they're at. Now, I'm in my place, I'm lobbying at the Anglican Communion level, but we need everybody to play their part. I can't be the people of this world who you can be, only you can be that. So use your networks, your influences to do things where you're at and reach out, and you'd be surprised at the difference it can make by just speaking out about these issues and raising awareness and breaking that silence and the shame and the stigma around abuse. And I've gone over my time, apologies for that. So that was a very quick, very rapid run through, and I'm sure you've got lots of questions, but do hold them until the end, and we can go through them then. Thank you.
Well, I'm Liz, but I'm only the clicker at the moment. Micheline is going to start off, and she is going to talk about Mothers Union and what they are doing in worldwide rather than in the UK. Over to you, Micheline.
Thank you very much, Liz. This is a joint effort by Liz, myself, and Hilary Richardson. And so my job here is just to present to you. What we want to present really, based on what Mandy said, is what the Mothers Unions are doing. First of all, it's important to know the numbers. Mothers Unions has a presence in 82 countries in all the 5 continents of the world. So we've put them there. We are in 30 countries in Africa, in 24 in America, North and South, 7 in Asia, 7 in Australia and Oceania, and 14 in Europe. The only continent we are not in is Antarctica. So that gives you the weight and the importance of Mothers Union. So what does Mothers Union do? Well, there are a number of actions that the Mothers Unions all over the world are doing. But these actions are varied, they come, they are the campaigning, the raising awareness, the lobbying of government at community level, at national, at international level, the data collection, the providing emotional and practical supports to the survivors and to the victims. So what we are doing now is just to give you a very few examples of what is being done on each one of those actions. So for example, on campaigning, raising awareness and speaking out for change, in New Zealand, they have started a movement which is called She's Not Your Rehab. And basically the movement is telling men, if you are having some pain, emotional or physical or psychological, your partner, your woman partner is not your rehab. So you have to go and get some help. So that's the movement. So in Rwanda, they had a conference on the intersection of sexual and gender-based violence and HIV and AIDS. As you know, HIV and AIDS was very much prevalent in Africa at some point. And this conference was attended not only by the representative of the churches, but also by government officials. And so there was some kind of a dialogue and raising awareness and speaking out about the changes that needed to happen in that case. The other example is Trinidad and Tobago. They had a panel discussion under the theme, Shine the Lights on Gender-Based Violence, and then made some recommendation and actions. So these are the kind of awareness raising that led to concrete action. In Uganda, in Myanmar, mothers' unions use local radio and the existing groups and networks to promote the awareness on sexual and gender-based violence. So there's community-based work, and the people at the community level listen to the radio rather than watching the television mainly. Next slide, please. The other actions that has been done is really the lobbying of governments and the policymakers at local, national, and international level. And one very, I thought salient point of that is what happened in Kenya, where the Mothers Union undertook, after extensive work and awareness in different communities, this work led to the enactment of the Female Genital Mutilation Act, which outlawed the practice of female genital mutilation. So lobbying government and policymaker on the lived experience of women who are victims of this has led to the government banning the practice altogether. Then the data collection. Of course, as Mandy has mentioned earlier, all those figures are very important not to see the extent of the problem, but also to see the number of victims. So, for example, in Australia, the Diocese of Banbury gathers the quantitative data, the number of women who are victims of sexual and gender-based violence, and they've displayed those numbers on the church board and the rectory board so that people are aware that these things happen within the church. So data is extremely important, not only to know the extent, but also to look at what can be done with regard to the incidents. The other thing that is being done by the Mothers Union worldwide is the providing emotional and livelihood support to survivors. So in the Democratic Republic of Congo, especially in Eastern DRC, which was said to be the capital of rape, the capital of the world for rape, the Mothers Unions are working with survivors by providing them with emotional support, but also by meeting their basic needs, such as housing, for example. In the Solomon Islands, the Mothers Union equips survivors with skills such as simple bookkeeping so that the women become economically empowered. In Brazil, there is a safe space called Casa Noelle, which is run by the Mothers Union, and it provides a safe space for 108 women victims of violence and 70 children who are the women's children. In India, Mothers Unions, in partnership with the Daily Brotherhood Society, organized the Women's Helpline. And this is a helpline that provides a listening ear to survivors of gender-based violence and offer them practical advice for what to do after being attacked, for example. In Zambia, Mothers Union educate the survivors about their legal rights, which is very important because some of them have the courage to go to court and bring the perpetrators to court. So Mothers Union educate them on how to go about all the legal procedures. And finally, there is the very important issue of challenging cultural norms through the dialogue and creating gender champions against sexual and gender-based violence. The cultural norms that say that women needs to shut up and women needs to have all the power, and one of the power that they exercise is the power to beat their women partners. So in Tanzania, Mothers Union developed an approach that focus on the heart and mind dialogue for behavioral change. And in Canada, they have what they call the Engaging Men, and the Mothers Union is part of the White Ribbon Campaign, which is the largest movement of men and boys working to end violence against women and redefine what we call masculinity. What is it to be a man?
Thank you very much, Micheline. That's heartwarming stuff of things that are being done. Now it comes to me to talk about what the Mothers Union is doing in the UK. The point is that the headquarters of Mothers Union is in the UK, and it's from here that much of the dynamic work of Mothers Union over the years has been overseen. Involvement with the UK Parliament in policy matters pertaining to marriage and family life goes back to the early 1900s. In 1929, for example, the Mothers Union was instrumental in having the marriage age of girls raised from 12 to 16. And that was only last century. Requests for views and information come regularly from the government to Central Mothers Union, and members are invited to join those consultations. Responses are collated and returned to the government, which incorporates the Mothers Union views into their bills. Most recently, the MU had significant input into the Domestic Abuse Bill, which you've just heard about, which became law in April this year. Central MU is also committed to fundraising within the UK for projects at home and abroad, training people to work within their own communities. Most important idea was the literacy and financial education programme, resulting not only in literacy improvement and the ability to have their own projects, it also showed that increasing respect for those wives by their husbands and a significant reduction of domestic violence. The most recent fundraising project is to train local facilitators, survivors themselves, to lead sessions on body mapping. This enables groups of survivors to discuss within a safe space what has happened to them. Crucially, Central Mothers Union provides a huge number of resources for raising awareness of the horrific prevalence of gender-based violence and for the 16 days of activism. I'll put up the website shortly, so please have your cameras ready. All members of the MU in the UK will be taking part in the 16 days from today until 10th of December. Using Mothers Union resources and their own initiatives, they will be raising awareness, campaigning, marching and holding vigils. The theme is No More 1 in 3, calling for an end to the violence and abuse suffered by 1 in 3 women and girls across the world. This Saturday, members will hold a global day of action in many places, all of them public. A 3-minute silence at precisely 3 minutes past 1, linking in with the theme. The silence will be in local time worldwide, so that the silences will run around the world for a full 24 hours. Do join us at that time. As Mothers Union considers that raising awareness of DA should be for 365 days a year, there are likely to be pop-up demonstrations everywhere. Southwark MU, for example, is planning to hold one next year in the Borough Market. These vigils raise awareness of the unacceptable number of women and girls, and indeed men, who suffer violence from family members. It doesn't happen where I live, or doesn't happen in my church, is a frequent response. Sadly, as you have heard, yes, it does. Bookmarks raising awareness and carrying contact details of helplines are tied to hedges and lampposts or left on buses and trains. Signposting leaflets carrying helpline details are put up in surgeries and libraries, in church loos and on their websites. Mothers Union in all Ireland put on a travelling exhibition called The Soles of Our Shoes. Please note the spelling. The pairs of shoes on display belonged to women, men and children, and the messages attached to every pair were heartbreaking. These shoes may be glamorous, but my life is not. My wife just treads all over me. Nobody cares what happens, are some of the examples. Hearing and sharing such voices educates, motivates, and inspires us to work alongside communities to help and respond to domestic abuse. Southwark MU members were inspired by the publication Responding to Domestic Abuse Guidelines, which came out of the Archbishop's Council in the year 2000. Since then, many have been working directly with survivors of domestic abuse in local refuges. Members collect underwear, toiletries, school uniform, bed linen, toys, makeup, food vouchers, etc., to donate to local refuges for survivors who frequently arrive with nothing more than the clothes they wear. Sadly, rape survivors are often in an even worse position, as their clothes might need to be retained for evidence purposes. Members hold knicker parties, which are great fun, as well as doing a great job. They're attended by families, friends, and neighbours who bring them with them pairs of pants of every side, but preferably pretty ones, or a luxury bag of makeup. The parties also give the opportunity to discuss the meaning of the term domestic abuse, which can take many forms, any one of which is soul-destroying. Survivors cook for themselves and their families while they are in the refuge. Members of local branches went into the refuges to teach basic cookery skills using nutritious but inexpensive ingredients. The imagination and skills of the survivors and their teenage children increased dramatically, enhancing their confidence in their abilities. Once the survivors have been in the refuge for a certain length of time, they move on to sheltered accommodation. Whole church congregations are then galvanized into action to collect boxes of basic living equipment, cutlery, crockery, pans, cleaning materials, bedding, etc., so that the family can learn to live independently again. All the work of Mothers Union members is underpinned by prayer. I commend to you the prayer diary compiled by Central Mothers Union. It's a resource of prayers and reflections for each day of the 16 days of activism. Breaking the silence, opening our eyes, calling for justice. This can be downloaded from the website. So here's the Central Mothers Union website, Restored, and UN Women, all of which have excellent resources which can be used in the future. And so now I leave you with a photograph of the House of Bishops endorsing the calls. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you much. Can you see my slides or have you got my notes? This is the big question. It's a real privilege to be here, and I need to say it's a real privilege to have been given the keys to the castle by Mandy over a year and a half ago now, and when I took over from her as leading the organisation Restored. It's an absolute privilege, and been the joy of the last 18 months, in the middle of a very difficult last 18 months. It's been one of the joys in the midst, although really rather a challenge. You see, we have a mission to speak up about violence against women and to equip the church to stand with survivors against domestic abuse. It's a really massive mission, and we're a very small team, but we are mighty. And so I've been asked if I could just share some ideas of what we can do as individuals and as churches to change the story for women in our community and to bring hope to survivors of domestic abuse. Because the reality is that some of us will sit there and we'll think, gosh, we've got loads of influence. You might be church leaders, you might be curates, you might be ordinands, you might be a vicar in your own right, and you might be thinking this, I could start preaching, because actually you're using our voices to speak up and show where the Bible speaks to this is really important. We could use our voices to say, or our influence to say, yes, we will put stickers on the back of loo doors, we will put posters in the foyer, we will make sure that the church knows that we care about domestic abuse, that we stand against it, and that we're here if anyone wants to speak up. But you might also be somebody who thinks, well, nobody will listen to me. But the truth is, we've all got influence in some shape or form. And actually, just earlier today as Restored, we held our own conference to speak to exactly this. So I have totally nicked what we talked about earlier on today. But we've created a whole bunch of steps that we're going to be re-emphasising over the days, the next 15 days that are left of activism each day, to have a look at some of the things that we as individuals can do to begin to change the story when it comes to gender-based violence. And the first one, as we have just so eloquently heard, is that we can all pray. And whether we do that individually or whether we gather a couple of friends together to pray for this issue that we care so passionately about, there's something that we can always do. You know, raising our voices to God is never a wasted moment, is it? It might be in small groups. I've said here you can join us on Fridays. That is because at Restored we send out a weekly prayer letter, and we invite people to join together with us on Zoom at 1:30 every Friday. And we have this every week it's a different bunch of people, and together we join our voices to pray for survivors, for those who are subjected to violence against women and girls in all its forms, to pray for partner organisations, to pray for Restored. And it's a really glorious way to finish the week, if I'm honest. It always leaves me on a bit of a high. But actually you can pray in all kinds of places. And actually on Restored's website, we've got some lovely liturgy that can be used in the church service to enable your whole congregation to pray corporately together for the issue, which would serve two purposes. It would be praying, and it would be showing your church that this is something that matters to you and matters to God. Now, part of our mission is to speak up, and we can all speak up in big and small ways. And some of the simplest things that we can do with that, it would be to share social media posts, whether that's Restored's posts or Mothers Union posts, or something that somebody else has done that raises the issue of gender-based violence, that perhaps shares a statistic or shares a story or shares something that's happening in the news. You can raise your voice just by hitting that button. In fact, you can raise your voice just by hitting like, because when you like a post, it helps it, you know, with all the metrics of social media, it helps it to reach more people. You haven't even had to share it. That might be the babyest step of all, but it will make a difference. It might be that you're sat there thinking, I'd love my church to be doing more about this. Maybe it's worth sending an email to somebody in the leadership team, to your vicar, to who, I don't know what church you go to, but to somebody, and saying, could I have a coffee with you sometime and talk about this, because I think it's important. If you're in the Anglican Church, you can refer back to all those resolutions that Mandy spoke about earlier, or you might want to invite a speaker. You know, there's many of us passionate about talking about this, and you could invite us to speak to your women's group or your church service on a Sunday, or wherever. And as part of speaking up, one of the things that at Restored we're really passionate about is that gender-based violence, domestic abuse, it's not just a women's issue, it's a human issue. And we desperately need to engage men in the conversation. Because the thing is, sometimes we talk about the extent of male violence, but the reality is not all men are violent. Most men aren't. I know wonderful, fantastic men who aren't. And yet taking that extra step to speak up against it, to show a different way, to speak out when they see something that is wrong, whether that's in speech or in, physical actions that are going on, is absolutely critical. And we've got some resources at Restored that, a fantastic FMS stands for First Man Standing. That's a campaign that we run, but we've got an amazing Bible study resource for men to engage with. And maybe that's something that you could share with a man in your life so that he could share it with some of the other men in his life, and encourage men to pray. I think sometimes when we talk about these things, we immediately start thinking women's ministry, but actually it's bigger than that. How can we invite men to engage with the issue alongside us, that men and women stand together the way we were always meant to? So the second part of our mission is equipping the church, and that's you, that's all of us standing together. And one of the ways that we do that, but that could be for you, your first step to making a difference, is through training. And so we run a number of levels of training, this entry level training that answers the 5 questions on the screen. What is it? What can we do? Why does she say? Where does it all start? And it's a very simple way in. And this is something that you might choose to do so that you become more aware, more educated, more able to respond yourself. Or you gather some friends, or you encourage the pastoral team within your church to get involved with. And then we have the next level, an intermediate level, whereby actually we delve deeper into theology and we really begin to understand the dynamics of power and control. And then coming early next year, it's not there yet, that's why it's in brackets, we're going to be running a How to Support a Survivor course too, in all of its complexities. And I'd really recommend the training. I can say that because I don't run it myself. I've got an amazing member of team who does that for us, and we have recommendations all the time from people who have done it, because people join and they learn so much in the course of the training. And then today we have launched a brand new resource, which we are very excited. I say it's brand new, it's actually an updated brand new resource. It's a resource that's in its 3rd edition, that was begun by Mandy years ago, and it's gone through various evolutions. And with the new Domestic Abuse Act, we have updated it and added some new sections about the impact of domestic abuse on children, and how as church we respond when the abuser is also part of our congregation, because it's complex and it's complicated and it's hard to know how to do. And so this phenomenal resource is now available on our website as of about lunchtime today, if I'm honest, so you're right at the front of the queue for this one. It's available at the moment as digital download, but this would be a wonderful thing. Your next step to making a difference might be downloading this for yourself, or it might be getting a copy and giving it to your vicar, or it might be getting some copies and putting them in the foyer of your church. It might be that this is a way that actually you can take an important message to the rest of your church. The third part of our mission is supporting survivors. And again, we've heard some ways that we can do that ourselves. And it's really important to think, what could I do? You might not think you know a survivor. That I could almost guarantee that you do. You just might not know it. But again, you might want to go out and buy this is me now shamelessly flogging our resources. But this is a survivor's handbook that we have written, and it's in response to the hundreds of questions that we get asked by survivors in our survivors network. We have nearly 400 women now in our survivors network, and all of them have not only been hurt and abused by men who are meant to love them, many of them have been let down by churches that were meant to love them. And it's left them with many theological questions about whether they can leave, what they can do, what are the next steps. Maybe a step that you can do to make a difference in your community is to have a copy of this ready to give to somebody who might need it in your community. Maybe it's to get a copy of this that you can leave in your church so that somebody who needs it might find it. It's a really important thing, but it doesn't have to be all about Restored, although I do recommend our resources. We've been doing this for a long time. It might be those things, it might be throwing that knicker party and raising resources, or volunteering at your local refuge. I know Mothers Union across the country has got some amazing relationships with local refuges. We partnered with many of you last year to get this handbook into refugees, because we recognised that it was the missing piece really for Christian women who'd ended up in refuges. And we, through the Mothers Union, and I'm so grateful to you, we distributed nearly 500 books into local refuges. It was an astonishing gift to give, and it made all the difference to women there. But building those relationships within your church and with local agencies will make all the difference. And with that in mind, I want to tell you about one last thing that you could do, and this is quite a big one. This probably takes a little bit more thinking, planning and chatting with various different groups within your church. But we have today launched a new initiative called Restored Beacon Churches, because we have a bit of a vision really of a network of these churches all around the country, shining their light everywhere they go. You see, we know that churches are in every city, in every town, in every village in the country. And we know that lots of those churches are already meeting lots of the needs of their local communities, food banks, debt centres, toddler groups, all sorts of things. And often the missing piece is domestic abuse support. And so what we want to see is churches that are trained up, ready to welcome, support and look after survivors of domestic abuse. And so if you did want to find out more about that, then do get in touch. That would be a very big way that your local church could begin to make a difference for women in your community and in your area. But there's loads of different ways. Do keep watching what's going on 16 Days of Activism across the MU, across Restored. We'll be highlighting all kinds of things all over the place, but there's just a few little things there to keep you started. Thank you.